Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everyone. We are going to talk about something that is coming up a lot lately. A lot of people are pondering this. I'm going to preface this by saying it doesn't have anything to do with politics. Trust in government. What has happened there? We're going to look at that from the angle of ethics, from a gentleman who has taught, researched, studied business ethics for decades, and he joins us today. Ronald Berenbeim is on the program. Ronald, welcome. How are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
Very well, very well. And I know this is an election year, so I'm going to say it again. We're not doing politics here. This is just the overall civil society governance and the approaches to that, and where the trust in government has gone, with an eye on that through ethics. Where do you want to start with this today?
Well, let's take the three branches of government and just, refresh everybody's memory so they can get focused on some of the things we might be talking about. Three branches are judicial, legislative, and executive. And when you look at those three branches of national government, and in many cases state government, you see a decline in public support and respect across the board. And so what is happening is that the decision-making process, what would ordinarily be the governmental function, for better or for worse, is in many cases being pushed down. And we'll discuss that. We have already discussed that to some extent with respect to product safety in the Boeing case, with respect to wages in the growing or developing effectiveness of labor unions, again, to organize. And also we've discussed it to some degree in the schools with our discussion about cell phones. So who's addressing these problems? Increasingly, it's local institutions and movements. So let's take, for example, the economic inequality, which the union organizing seemed to address, and those were UAW organizing campaigns in Tennessee, of all places, which you might not have seen in the 1930s. And they were organizing of Starbucks in Buffalo, where the first Starbucks was organized, and statewide campaigns in Georgia. And that's not the sort of place that labor ever attempted seriously to organize. They didn't try to organize McDonald's, fast food companies, which Starbucks would resent being called, but which nonetheless is more or less what they are in terms of their workforce. That wasn't considered a target, and nor was it. Just didn't work out. But now it is, and so that's being pushed down. And then when we talked about the Boeing product safety, and by the way, there were, I think, 4 incidents involving Boeing planes, not the model we discussed in our first discussion, but more increasingly across the board Boeing planes. Boeing, one way or another, was always able to rely on the competence of its product, by and large, its product managers and so on. Increasingly, what information we have is either from whistleblowers, and that has happened, or the plane has just had to emergency land, and that that can't be hidden from view, and all the consumers are on board, as opposed to a defective product that might go out to consumers in very different places. And then third, there are schools and libraries. Now, this cell phone situation is increasingly now not a governmental function. I don't know that it ever could have been, but schools are increasingly asking students not to bring cell phones or to check them in lockers as they enter the school. And so that's been the form of regulation, nothing by government. And then there is also the library issue. And school assignment issues. Increasingly, there has been political interference or engagement or effort to ban some books from the library or from student syllabuses. And that's been a controversy that the schools are embroiled in and pretty much on their own without any guidance from government, or to the extent that they have it, as I think may be the case to some degree in Florida, they are having to fight back against it.
Yeah, I just want to interject it. Funny
Yeah,
you bring that up.
sorry.
I had this conversation with somebody I know who is a librarian, and she also works in a school district as a teacher, but mostly she's a librarian in a school and then does some part-time work in a public library. She also has authored some children's books. And I was kind of surprised to learn that the library would not accept her book about Halloween. It was just a cute book about a spider. I'm not kidding.
I'm not surprised to hear that. And yeah, and in fact, one woman down in Florida who is a writer developed a very novel solution to that problem. She opened a bookstore in the town of Fayetteville, I think it was,
Uh-huh.
and got a lot of publicity for that, as well as some business, I'm sure. And number of authors own books around the country, bookstores, as I'm sure you know. So that's been one solution, but not solution, but response, I would say. But books are an issue. And then the third thing is, we've seen in the last week the investment strategies and policies of colleges and universities, and boycott, divestment, sanction efforts on the part of student groups. And aside from the fact that if someone were to start demonstrating outside my house here and tell me I had to boycott certain category of companies or industries or whatever, I couldn't tell you what stock I own. I own, I have a retirement fund and so on, and that's invested in various mutual funds and so
Sure.
so how can colleges undertake this kind of exercise? However, they are being asked to do so. And in the paper today, I think there was something about Harvard saying they were willing to talk to a student group. But I think the conversation will consist of Harvard telling the student group why they can't do it, to show them how difficult it would be if they tried. So,
And you mentioned a word, while we're here, you read it in the paper. You don't hear that often. Newspaper.
Yeah, and that was I think we can all derive some level of comfort at the way there are grassroots efforts afoot to address some of these problems. But one reason why the local response hasn't been better is because there has been a huge decline in local newspapers.
Yeah.
They're just going out of business all over the place. So you have a bunch of people whose knowledge of the news, and to a certain degree, I plead guilty to that, whose news comes from Fox or MSNBC. I won't tell you which one I look at regularly, but just even newspapers, even printed newspapers are increasingly less a source of the news. And the drying up of the local newspapers has meant the apprenticeship for most newspaper people, 50 years ago or so, when I was getting started in the world, in that field, was a local newspaper, and they'd acquire a very granular, so to speak, professional training. They'd talk to sources, they'd interview people, they'd investigate documents and so on. And now you have people going to work for the big national broadcasting companies or newspapers who don't have that kind of experience. They might have gotten a PhD and taught for a while at Harvard or something like that, rather than work for some local newspapers. So that too is an issue, and that's been why these local responses, while more effective than one would have thought they could be, have not been as effective as they might have been.
Well, even to your point there, so many broadcast outlets, either locally or even nationally, regionally, they're all cutting back. Some of the biggest companies just had another cutback recently. And, so many people in these facilities, whether it's radio or TV, have multiple jobs. So how can they really focus, fact check too, accurately fact check? I don't know if that's even possible anymore.
No, I think they rely, if it's an election campaign, they pretty much rely on the opposition party to fact check.
It's true. It's a shame what we're faced with now. And if you do any kind of a survey, most people say they get their news from social media.
That's right. And so, there isn't any question social media does not pretend even to be unbiased. They are there to promote a certain point of view or a certain cause or whatever, and that's where you go, and you rely on them for whatever it is that the other side is.
Well, it's also people in surveys say that they get their news from social media, from their feeds. So that could be their friends reposting something. We don't even know where it came from. I've seen so many times, and it's usually the same people that I barely know that I'm friends with on Facebook or Instagram, and they'll repost things, and then I go and check where it's coming from, and it's just a made up website that is just out there just to grab people and have ads on it, and it's all bogus. It's fake news, if you will.
Well, what's more, then you have the social media sites are increasingly banning people like Trump. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's banned from X, formerly known as Twitter, Twitter formerly known as X. I don't know which of the two it is, but so he has his own Truth Social, and you always look, and then you say, oh yeah, Truth Social, okay. So you aren't prepared to take him as seriously as you might if it came from a more neutral, ostensibly more neutral source.
How do we increase trust in government. How could that ever be done at this point?
Well, I think, there was an old saying, I forget who originated it. To have someone trust you, you have to trust them. To get a man to trust you, you have to trust him. Okay, so, if we don't trust the source has to trust us. And basically, it seems to me that both sides of the American divide seem to think that the other sides are idiots. And it wasn't so long ago.
Hmm.
I'll confess, in case you can't guess, that I am a Democrat, have been all my life, though I've occasionally voted for Republicans, and but I always had Republican friends. I always knew people who were Republicans. We always had discussions. They were, fairly good natured. And sometimes we'd even affect one another's opinion. Now, I simply do not know anyone who voted for Trump, quite frankly. I don't know anyone who voted for Trump. Probably people who voted for Trump don't know anyone who didn't vote for Trump. And,
Hmm.
without communication, what are you going to do?
Very challenging there. And then, I mean, that's from in your circles. I do know people who voted for Trump and can't wait for, the upcoming election. By the way, we're not doing politics here. We're just kind of looking at this from a broad stroke from the ethic side of things. I want to go back to what you said regarding Starbucks and how it began with workers in Buffalo. Did I hear that right?
Yes, yes.
Why do you think it was there when Starbucks began in Seattle?
Good question. I I don't know. I think, but I think that the likelihood is that the uh, union and the national union was one that, let's see, I've got the name written down somewhere here, but the national union probably had a pretty strong position in that city. And
Hmm.
I worked for a time as a business agent of Motion Picture and Television Cameramen's Union, and uh,
Hmm.
some people came to me and said, "We would like to join your union." So it may
Oh,
even be that they were approached by some Starbucks employees
wow.
and who wanted the union to come in and organize. And the process of organizing is you collect cards from employees in that bargaining unit. And of course, that means that how the bargaining unit is defined, either in terms of work function or location, is critical. You can define it in a way where the union is sure to lose or where the union may be sure to win. But in any event, if you have 30% of the people who are in that union or more, then you write a letter to the management and say, please be advised that we represent this group and we'd like to meet with you to bargain. And the company will write back and say, well, that's very nice, but we don't think you represent a majority of them. And we don't know how you're defining the union, the employees that you should be representing. If you're including the baristas
Hmm.
only or whatever. So then there might be a hearing to see who's actually in that bargaining group. And then there would be an election. And if the union wins the election, then they begin to bargain and sometimes even wind up with a contract.
I thought I heard you say a moment ago that you were in a union that represented camera people?
Yes. Yeah, I was not a member of the union.
Okay.
I was representing them as a professional, as their business agent.
Gotcha. Okay. For a moment there, I was like, wow, he, this guy's done a lot. You know, ethics
Well,
teacher, researcher, and broadcast camera person.
no, I wasn't a camera person, but
Gotcha.
I knew a lot of them and I represented them in bargaining talks. So over time, I became acquainted with what it is that they actually did. So,
So that's very interesting that we learned that so you do have a somewhat of a background when it comes to unions.
oh yeah. And then
Wow.
I wrote one of my first major pieces of research was The Declining Market for Unionization, published in 1978. That was after I left the Cameramen's Union, and I said, well, they're down from the mid-30s, which they were in the 1950s, when we had a Republican president, by the way. About 1957 was the height, about 33%. They're now down to about 22%. And if you take out government employees, which they're in the process of organizing pretty effectively, then they would be down to about 15 or 16%. And all my old, a couple of my old friends in the union said, oh, you're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong. But this information is a matter of public record. The Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes it every year. So there was no question that I was right. Well, now the figure is about 10%, if you can believe that. And even with all the current activity, the actual percentage hasn't gone up at all, because the as soon as one unit is organized, another one's laid off. So pretty much it's at 10% right now.
Wow. Wow. You mentioned before whistleblowers in connection with unions and trust in government. Can we just for a moment put a microscope on that? Your thoughts overall on that?
Well, I think the whistleblower, in is always a character in the drama about which one feels some ambivalence, because you don't, I mean, you're always suspicious of their motives.
Hmm.
Management is, and so often are other employees. Maybe they don't feel they've been treated fairly, they don't like the company or whatever, but they are often right, and they are often proven right. But they're really a very interesting kind of personality type. I don't know how much more I can say than that, but I will try if you have some questions.
Well, validation of information when it comes to somebody making noise about a situation, government, union, whatever it might be, sometimes it's taken as face value. How often is it accurate?
I, I don't know that I don't know that there are any figures on that, and it's hard to know what categories, if you're talking about something like Boeing, where you're talking about product uh, safety, uh, and you see that, you think that this plane could not have been approved for flight. There's a defect in the whole process, or you're in the design group and you think there's a defect in the design. Uh, that's one thing, and it I certainly don't know uh, how pervasive it is, uh, but it is And they might find that there was a defect, but that management was saying it was correct in its judgment that the defect, nothing is perfect, and that the defect was sufficient to go ahead with the product. But it's also the case that I think, and I was working out in Seattle. That's where I was doing the work for the National Labor Relations Board, that Boeing had a pretty impeccable reputation in terms of quality control and so on in the early 1970s, believe it or not, it was that long ago. And that it just isn't there right now.
Yeah.
It appears that other airline, other airplane manufacturers are making safer airplanes, and people are buying them, and airline companies have no choice but to buy them.
Well, many would say that comes from cutbacks, employee retention, and also loyalty, because if your employees don't care, it's like, you know what, I'm not gonna tighten that bolt up, or I'm gonna leave that off. You know, what's the worst that could happen? Yeah,
I'm gonna try to make enough money to buy a car so I never have to fly anywhere.
Ronald, we're out of time. Interesting viewpoints on all of this, especially when we look at it through the lens of an election year. And always great having you on here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much. I enjoyed talking with you.
Same.
Appreciate it.
We'll be right back.
Bye-bye.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action. Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.